I stood frozen in the doorway, watching my daughter-in-law smooth out the desk where my bed used to be. My son, my own flesh and blood, just nodded along as if packing his widowed mother into the laundry room was the most natural thing in the world. "It's just temporary," he said, gesturing to a cot shoved between detergent bottles and dusty vents. "After everything I gave them raising him alone, after his father died, helping with bills, cooking every night, they gave me a corner fit for folded clothes. So I folded their comfort into paperwork, sorted every receipt like a weapon, and when the final cycle ran, I left their future washed out and wrung dry. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from." It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence, it lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The grocery bags sagged in Joan Whitaker's hands as she pushed through the back door of her son's suburban Milwaukee home. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and fresh paint, too clean, too staged. A hum she didn't recognize vibrated down the hall, a muffled power drill echoing in the walls. Her bedroom door stood wide open, not her bedroom anymore. The quilt she'd stitched 20 years ago was gone, the dresser stripped bare, the cedar chest missing. The space held a sleek desk, a padded swivel chair, and twin computer monitors still wearing their plastic protectors. Caleb crouched under the desk, tugging wires with the casual entitlement of a man arranging furniture in his own domain. Joan froze in the doorway, her paper bag of apples tipping sideways until one rolled across the hardwood. "Where's my room?" Caleb looked up with a satisfied grin, as if he'd rehearsed this moment. "Mom, we need this space for our new home office. Monica's design clients need somewhere professional. You'll be fine in the laundry room, close to everything." Monica appeared behind him, her perfume sharp and sugary. She wore her permanent smirk like a pearl necklace, polished and smug. "It's more efficient, Joan. You'll be right near the back door. Easy for you, easy for us." Joan's throat tightened. "The laundry room, you'll be comfortable," Monica said, brushing invisible lint from her silk blouse. "We set up a cot. It folds up when you're not using it." Joan felt the heat rush to her ears. She had lived under this roof since her husband's death, paying half the mortgage when they needed it, keeping the house spotless, cooking dinners. Now they were shoving her between detergent bottles and dryer lint. Her voice stayed calm, though each word scraped like glass. "You emptied my room without asking." Caleb leaned back in the new chair, spinning once before stopping with deliberate control. "We didn't think it was a big deal. You hardly use it except to sleep. And hey, Monica's business is expanding. This is about family progress." Progress. The word clanged inside her. By nightfall, her belongings had been stacked in cardboard boxes beside the washing machine. The cot sagged in the corner, dressed with a single flat sheet. When she sat down, the springs whined under her weight. The room smelled of bleach and warm fabric softener, and the constant hum of the dryer vent made the walls tremble faintly. She pressed her palms into her knees, forcing herself to stay upright, not to fold. The next afternoon, Shirley Mann arrived unannounced, storming in with her wiry gray hair unpinned and her voice sharp. "Joan, where's your quilt? Where's your dresser?" Joan guided her friend to the laundry nook. The sight of the cot stole Shirley's words. For a long moment she only stared, lips parting, then shutting again like someone struggling not to curse. "They put you in here," Shirley finally managed, her voice lowering into something dangerous. Joan managed a faint smile, though her stomach twisted. "They think I'm quiet, that I'll accept whatever corner they give me." She ran her hand across a box labeled personal, her neat handwriting steady even as her insides churned. Shirley's eyes flashed. "You shouldn't put up with this. You're not a stray dog to be tucked between spin cycles." Joan bent down and pulled one box closer. Inside, folders of crisp manila slip rested in perfect rows, records she had kept for decades, from her late husband's pension statements to house deeds and account ledgers. She slid a finger along the edge of the top file, the paper cool against her skin. "They want me in the laundry?" she whispered, her voice steady now, the tremor gone. "Then I'll launder their future." That night, When the house had gone still and Caleb's snores thudded faintly down the hall, Joan pulled another box close to her cot. Dust coated the cardboard flap. With deliberate care she opened it and withdrew a thick binder marked Financial, 1980-2005. The pages inside smelled faintly of ink and age. She began to turn them, one by one, her eyes narrowing with a precision she hadn't used in years. The sound of rustling paper mixed with the faint churn of the washer cycling down. By the time the clock read midnight, she had stacks of folders laid out across the dryer lid. Numbers, names, signatures, her past pressed in neat columns, waiting. With a steady hand, Joan reached for the oldest file, her eyes glinting as she began to dig. Stacks of folders balanced precariously on the dryer lid, their manila edges softened from decades of handling. Joan slid one open, the rustle of paper sharp in the hum of the machines. Mortgage deeds, savings certificates, her late husband's pension records with his signature still neat in blue ink. Each page felt like a weapon disguised as paper. Shirley leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed tight, eyes scanning the neat piles. "Every document in here," she said, her voice carrying the weight of experience, "is soap and water. You scrub with these, you'll get stains out no one else even sees." Joan's mouth curved into a thin smile. She lifted a page, the ink catching the harsh fluorescent light. "Then I'll wash them clean out." The cot sagged behind her, a reminder of humiliation, but her spine stayed straight. Sorting through numbers and signatures came back to her like muscle memory from years at the dry cleaners, where precision meant survival. Mistakes ruined fabric. Mistakes here could ruin lives. The next morning, she and Shirley carried 2 heavy boxes out to the car. The chill in the Milwaukee air bit at Joan's cheeks, and she pulled her coat tighter, the leather stiff from years of use. "You sure about this?" Shirley asked, adjusting her grip on the box. Joan set hers down on the trunk with quiet determination. "If they think I'm tucked away in a laundry corner, they've forgotten what I'm capable of." The attorney's office downtown smelled of polished wood and expensive coffee. Victor Lane greeted them with a firm handshake, his dark suit pressed sharp as a blade. His office overlooked the river, sunlight flashing against the glass, making the room feel both open and uncomfortably exposed. Victor tapped the box. Joan slid across his desk. "What am I looking at?" 40 years of records, Joan said evenly. "Deeds, pensions, savings accounts. Every receipt worth keeping." He raised a brow, flipping open a file with swift precision. "Most people your age don't keep this level of detail." "I ran a dry cleaner for 30 years, Joan replied. "I was trained to notice stains before anyone else saw them." A smile tugged at the corner of Victor's mouth. He looked up at her, eyes narrowing with curiosity. "And they shoved you into a laundry room?" Joan's jaw tightened, but her tone stayed level. "They stripped me of my bedroom. They thought I'd fold." Victor leaned back, folding his hands. "Then let's spin their lives dry." Shirley chuckled low, a flash of satisfaction in her eyes. Joan only nodded once, her voice cool and steady. "Time to start the cycle." For the next hour, Victor combed through the papers, marking pages with yellow tabs, humming occasionally, as if piecing together a puzzle. The rhythm of his pen tapping against the desk punctuated each discovery. Joan's signature clear, Caleb's absence notable, Monica's name nowhere in sight. When they finally rose to leave, Joan felt the weight in her chest shift, not lighter, but sharper, like a blade finally honed. Back in the quiet suburb, the neighborhood pulsed with weekend chatter. Lawn mowers buzzed, children shouted from trampolines, and Monica's voice carried from the front porch like a trumpet. Joan slowed as she approached the house, Shirley just behind her. "Our new office expansion," Monica was telling a group of neighbors clustered on the lawn. Her manicured hand gestured proudly toward the window that used to frame Joan's bedroom curtains. "Caleb and I decided it was time to upgrade. Clients expect a certain standard, you know." The neighbors nodded, murmurs of admiration rippling through the crowd. Monica soaked it in, basking as though she'd built the empire herself. From the sidewalk, Joan stood still, her breath steady. The sting of hearing Monica brag about her stolen room didn't show on her face, but her grip on the grocery bag in her hand tightened until the paper crinkled. Shirley glanced at her, waiting for the outburst that never came. Instead, Joan gave the smallest of smiles, one that never reached her eyes. Her case had already begun, and Monica didn't even know she was walking into the wash cycle. The long oak table gleamed under the chandelier, its surface crowded with steaming dishes, roast chicken, scalloped potatoes, Monica's glazed carrots polished to shine. Joan sat stiffly at the far end, shoulders aching from a restless night on the cot. Her fork scraped against porcelain, each bite tasting faintly of detergent, as though the laundry room had seeped into her tongue. Caleb raised his glass of wine, smirking down the table. "You know Mom snores less in there. Must be the white noise from the dryer. Works wonders." Monica burst into laughter, tilting her head back so her earrings caught the light. "Laundry suits her," she added. "Fresh linens, warm air. It's practically a spa." Joan's lips pressed into a line. She didn't answer, didn't give them the satisfaction of reaction. Instead, she moved food around her plate, taking mental notes as if recording evidence. Their laughter, their choice of words, their arrogance, it all stacked neatly like files on the dryer. The room carried the smells of butter and garlic, but Joan couldn't taste anything past the sour bite of pride. Her eyes drifted to the window. Outside, the neighbor's porch light flickered on, illuminating Monica's prized hydrangeas. Joan thought of Monica bragging there just the day before, parading their office expansion, as though it were a badge of accomplishment. Caleb stabbed a drumstick with a grin. "You should see how efficient the setup is. Dual monitors, ergonomic chair. Monica's clients are going to be so impressed." Monica leaned forward, her eyes glittering. "Presentation matters, Joan. That's something you never quite understood. But I'll teach you. People judge you on where you sit, what you wear, how you present." Joan lifted her water glass. "So they're judging you," she murmured. The table stilled for half a breath, Caleb's chewing pausing mid-bite. Then Monica and never let another laugh, high and brittle, as though Joan's words hadn't grazed her ribs. Shirley visited later that week, slipping into the laundry nook with a grocery bag of her own, pastries from the bakery on Kinnickinnick Avenue. She perched on a box of folded sweaters, tearing into a croissant with the blunt ferocity of someone biting back anger. "They humiliated you at dinner?" she asked, flakes of pastry dusting her lap. "They want me to shrink," Joan said, sorting papers at the dryer lid. "I'd rather stretch." Shirley grinned, her teeth sharp. "Good, because Victor filed the first set of paperwork yesterday. Fraud report, preliminary filings. The rinse cycle has started." Joan looked up from her ledger, her eyes steady. The hum of the washer filled the silence, steady and rhythmic, like the ticking of a clock marking time. "Then let's see what rises to the surface." The following afternoon, Victor called her in for a quick meeting. His office smelled of leather and polished oak, the blinds drawn against the low winter sun. He tapped a folder against his palm, his expression controlled but edged with energy. "Joan," he said, lowering himself into the chair across from her, "something surfaced when I ran your credit pull. Not the pension, not the deeds. Something newer." Joan leaned in, her pulse quickening. "How new?" "2 years," Victor said. He slid a paper across the desk. At the top, Whitaker, Joan Msay, credit line approval. Beneath it, Monica's name appeared as an authorized signer, her looping signature unmistakable. Joan's breath caught. She traced the letters without touching them, her fingertips hovering above the page. The neatness of Monica's flourish made her stomach turn. Victor's gaze was steady, unflinching. "She opened a credit line in your name, and she's been spending." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward until Joan felt them in her bones. Her humiliation at the dinner table hardened into something colder, sharper. She sat back, steadying her voice though her chest burned. "Then it's not just my room they've stolen." The folder on Victor's desk glowed under the harsh office light, as if it had been waiting years to be opened. Joan stared at the paper again, her name bold across the header, the neat signature scrawled beneath, "Monica Whitaker, authorized signer. Her pulse hammered in her ears, louder than the muted traffic drifting up from the Milwaukee street below. For a moment the office walls felt too close, the scent of polished leather and Victor's coffee pressing in on her. That's her handwriting, Joan said finally, her voice calm but low, like ice cracking on a frozen lake. Victor leaned back in his chair, his eyes sharp. This isn't just a mistake, Joan. It's identity theft, pure and simple. Joan straightened her shoulders, the humiliation of the dinner table still fresh in her bones. Then we'll iron her out in court. Victor's mouth twitched into the faintest smile, not of amusement but of respect. Good, because she's been running up balances you never authorized. High-end retail, designer furniture. There's even a purchase order for custom drapes nearly $5,000. Shirley, seated beside Joan, let out a low whistle. No detergent strong enough to wash that away. Joan closed the folder with deliberate care, as though sealing Monica's fate inside. She had spent her life pressing creases, smoothing out flaws in fabric until they looked new again. Now she imagined Monica's life flattened under the same steady iron. The next step came quickly. Victor filed a fraud report with the credit bureau, his assistant's keyboard clicking a relentless rhythm in the adjoining office. Joan sat perfectly still as documents were scanned and notarized, her silence carrying more force than anger ever could. She signed her name in steady strokes, the ballpoint pen gliding across the page like a blade. When she and Shirley stepped out of the building into the brittle winter air, the sky above Milwaukee was a hard gray, the kind that pressed low and heavy. Traffic roared across the bridge, headlights glowing against the gloom. Joan pulled her coat tighter and inhaled deeply. The cold cut through her lungs, clearing her head. She thinks she's clever, Shirley said, adjusting her scarf against the wind, but she's about to learn her designer drapes won't cover this mess. Joan's lips curled faintly. Fabric always tells the truth. You can press it, starch it, stretch it, but in the end, the weave shows everything. That night in the laundry nook, Joan stacked her files neatly back into boxes, one pile for Victor, one for safekeeping. The hum of the dryer was steady, the air warm and faintly scented with detergent. She lay on the cot but didn't close her eyes, listening instead to the rhythm of the house, the clink of Monica's heels upstairs, the dull thump of Caleb closing doors, the laughter muffled through the vents. They believed they'd won. By morning, news began to ripple quietly. A letter arrived first, acknowledgement of her fraud claim. Then an email notification blinked across her phone, each line of text another stitch tightening around Monica's lies. Joan read them in silence, sipping her coffee from a chipped mug, every word a promise that the spin cycle had only just begun. The unexpected came later that week. Joan was folding towels at the dryer when the landline rang, its shrill tone cutting through the house. She picked up, expecting a neighbor, maybe Shirley. Instead, a brisk male voice crackled through the receiver. Mrs. Whitaker, this is Collections Recovery on behalf of Fairway Furniture. We're contacting you regarding the outstanding balance of $11,482. Joan's knuckles whitened around the phone. I didn't purchase furniture. Our records show otherwise. The man pressed, his tone clipped and insistent. The account is in your name, authorized 2 years ago. We need to discuss repayment options. The hum of the dryer deepened, rattling the laundry room walls. Joan stood very still, her breath steady though her chest burned with a rising fury. Monica hadn't just stolen her credit, she had built a world on Joan's name, and now the bill collectors were circling. She lowered the phone slowly, eyes narrowing on the folders stacked neatly on the dryer. The machine clicked into its final spin cycle, louder, faster, relentless. Joan's expression hardened. If Monica thought she could bury her in debt, she was about to learn what it meant to be wrung dry. The phone calls kept coming. Each day brought another collector, another demand, another insistence that Joan owed thousands for purchases she had never made. Sofas, jewelry, even a weekend spa package at a resort she'd never stepped foot in. Each voice on the line carried the same mixture of suspicion and scripted courtesy, pressing her for repayment. Joan logged every call in a spiral notebook, the neat columns of dates and amounts lining up like soldiers. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't plead, she simply wrote it down. By the third week, the pages had filled like a dam about to crack. Victor's office smelled faintly of ink and printer toner when Joan arrived with the notebook. He flipped through it, his sharp eyes narrowing as he skimmed. "This isn't just one stain, Joan. This is a load." She sat across from him, her posture composed, her voice steady. "Then we'll bleach everything." The unexpected twist came not from a phone call, but from Victor's assistant barging into the office, a stack of papers in hand. Her face was pale, her eyes darting between Joan and Victor. "It's bigger than we thought," she said, placing the files on the desk. Victor pulled the top sheet free. His jaw tightened. "Multiple accounts," he muttered. "Not one, not two, 6, all in your name, Joan. Opened across different banks, balances in the tens of thousands." Shirley, who had insisted on sitting in for moral support, slammed her palm against the desk. "That vulture's been nesting in Joan's credit." Joan inhaled slowly, her fingers interlacing neatly in her lap. "Show me." Victor turned the files toward her. Each statement carried Joan's name, her social security number, her address. But the purchases told the story clearly. High-end boutiques on Michigan Avenue, jewelry counters in Chicago, salon memberships, and even a luxury SUV leased under Joan's credentials. The signatures, slanted, stylish, practiced, were Monica's. Shirley leaned close, her breath sharp with outrage. "She paraded those handbags like trophies, and she paid for them with your name." Joan touched the corner of one page, her face unreadable. The silence stretched until Victor finally broke it. "We'll file for fraud, damages, and restitution. I want this documented airtight. If Monica so much as breathes in court, we'll have her pinned." Joan nodded once. "Do it." For the next hour, the office buzzed like a war room. Papers shuffled, pens scratched, phones rang. Joan sat quietly, her gaze fixed on the window, where snow flurries swirled against the Milwaukee River. Her humiliation had hardened into resolve, every gust of wind outside mirroring the cold focus inside her. When Victor slid the final draft of the complaint across the table, Joan signed her name with the same precision she had once used to mark tags at the dry cleaner. Each loop of her pen felt like stitching a seam that would hold. Shirley exhaled loudly, a grin tugging at her lips. Heavy cycle engaged. By the time Joan returned to the laundry nook that evening, she no longer saw a cot in the corner. She saw a command post. Her files stacked neatly like ammunition, her spiral notebook waiting for the next call. The air smelled faintly bleach, the dryer's rumble steady as a drumbeat. The papers were filed. Now it was only a matter of time. The moment arrived sooner than expected. On a crisp Saturday afternoon, Monica hosted what she called a networking brunch in the front yard. Folding tables groaned under catered platters of shrimp and champagne flutes. Neighbors gathered, their coats pulled tight against the chill, but their curiosity stronger than the cold. Monica flitted among them in a cream sweater dress, gesturing proudly toward the house, her laughter rising above the hum of chatter. Joan watched from the driveway, her hands tucked into her coat pockets, her expression calm. She didn't move, didn't speak, not even when the sheriff's cruiser rolled quietly to the curb. The uniformed officer stepped out, papers in hand. The murmur of conversation faltered, heads turning, champagne glasses freezing halfway to lips. Monica blinked, her smile faltering as the sheriff approached. "Mrs. Monica Whitaker?" he asked, voice steady and carrying. She laughed nervously, adjusting her necklace. "Yes?" The officer handed her the thick envelope, crisp against her manicured fingers. "You've been served." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed from cell phones raised discreetly. Monica's painted smile cracked, her knuckles tightening on the papers, as if she could crumple them out of existence. From the edge of the driveway, Joan stood motionless, her eyes calm as the neighbors' whispers swirled like wind through dry leaves. The scent of shrimp cocktail turned sour in the air. The spin cycle had officially begun. The brunch dissolved into whispers and darting eyes, champagne glasses lowering as though each crystal flute now held poison. Monica stood frozen in the middle of her own lawn, the thick envelope clutched in her trembling hands. The cream of her sweater dress did nothing to hide the crimson flush crawling up her neck. Caleb rushed forward, his face tight with embarrassment, his voice pitched too high. There must be some mistake. Monica, don't just stand there. Tell him. He turned on the sheriff, puffing out his chest, as though authority might bend to indignation. The sheriff didn't flinch. Papers have been served, everything else is for the court. He tipped his cap, returned to the cruiser and drove off, leaving the neighborhood in a stunned hush. Monica's eyes flicked wildly across the crowd, seeking an ally, a lifeline. But the neighbors, who had once fawned over her brunch spreads and backyard upgrades, now studied the cracks in their wine cup, avoided her gaze, or whispered behind manicured hands. She was on display, and the stage lights had turned cruel. Joan turned away before Monica's glare could reach her. She walked inside with measured steps, her heels soft against the hardwood, and retreated to her laundry room. The door clicked shut, muffling the chaotic voices from outside. The dryer hummed. Warm air filled the small space with the faint scent of lavender softener. Joan unfolded a fresh load of towels, smoothing the edges, stacking them neatly. Her hands moved with calm precision, as if she weren't the cause of the storm raging just beyond the walls. When Shirley called that evening, her laugh crackled through the phone line like dry leaves catching fire. Neighbors got quite a show. That's the spin cycle, Joan. Joan placed another towel in the stack, her tone serene. It's only the rinse. The real cycle hasn't even started. The following morning Victor called her downtown again. His office blinds were half drawn, casting angled lines across his desk where another file waited. He gestured for Joan to sit, his expression tight but satisfied. The court approved our motion. Monica's accounts are frozen effective immediately. Joan lowered herself into the leather chair, hands folded neatly in her lap. So the drapes, the handbags, the spa trips, locked down, Victor confirmed. She won't be able to buy so much as a sandwich without it bouncing back. He leaned back, watching Joan carefully. You understand this will ignite a war inside your house. Joan's lips curved faintly. It already did. I'm just making sure I win. That prediction proved true the moment she returned home. Monica was waiting in the foyer, her nails clicking against the envelope, as she clutched it like a weapon. Her eyes were glassy with fury, her voice sharp enough to cut. You did this to me. Joan set her purse on the console table with quiet grace. No, Monica, you did this to yourself. Caleb appeared at his wife's side, his jaw tight, sweat shining at his temple. Mom, you don't know what you've started. This is going to ruin everything. Joan looked at him. Her son, who had once begged for money to cover rent, who had leaned on her after his father's funeral. Now his loyalty bent to the woman who had gutted her life. She spoke softly, but each word landed with weight. I warned you years ago, Caleb. Every stain shows eventually. Monica's face twisted. She threw the envelope down, papers spilling across the hardwood like snow. You'll regret this. But Joan only picked up her purse again and carried it toward the laundry room, leaving Monica kneeling among the scattered pages. 2 days later, a notice arrived in Victor's office. He called Joan at once, his voice clipped but steady. The judge has set a date. Fraud trial, expedited due to evidence. 4 weeks. Joan listened in silence, the dryer rumbling in the background like distant thunder. She ran her hand along the stack of freshly folded sheets, the corners perfectly aligned, then spoke into the receiver with the calmness of someone who had already pictured the outcome. Good. Let's see how clean she comes out. By Monday morning, the neighborhood no longer hummed with ordinary chatter. It buzzed with scandal. From the Whitaker's front lawn to the corner coffee shop, whispers carried like wind through autumn leaves. The story was already out. Monica Whitaker served at her own brunch, accused of defrauding her mother-in-law. Joan heard it in the checkout line at the grocery store. 2 women in front of her lowered their voices, but not enough. Imagine stealing from your husband's mother. And after all those parties she threw, guess we know who paid for them now. They didn't notice Joan at first, but when she stepped forward with her basket of apples and bread, their faces reddened. Joan only met their eyes, steady and unflinching, before paying in cash and walking out with her head high. Across the street, Monica's world was shrinking. The same brunch friends who once gathered around her backyard tables now avoided her calls. Her group text chat, once a steady stream of emojis and shopping photos, had gone silent. When she tried to visit one friend for coffee, the door barely opened before a muttered excuse was offered. Monica returned home with her sunglasses hiding watery eyes. Caleb, meanwhile, became a ghost in his own neighborhood. The man who once shouted across driveways about sports scores now avoided even taking the trash to the curb. One neighbor saw him crack the garage door just enough to slip his car out before speeding away. His shoulders hunched, his stride shortened. He no longer waved. Inside the Whitaker house, tension settled thick as dust. Monica slammed doors, her heels clattering across the hardwood. Caleb muttered in frustration, his voice carrying faintly through the vents. But Joan, tucked into her laundry room, carried on as though nothing had changed. She folded towels with calm precision, her movements steady, deliberate. The faint lavender scent from dryer sheets filled the air, soothing against the muffled chaos beyond the door. Shirley visited, arms crossed as she leaned against the dryer. They used to brag about that shiny office. Now the whole neighborhood knows it's built on theft. That stain won't come out. Joan gave a thin smile, smoothing the edge of a towel before stacking it neatly. Fabric always remembers its spills. Meanwhile, Victor worked quietly but effectively. He pulled every social media post Monica had ever flaunted, handbags draped across her arm, champagne toasts with captions about new money, snapshots of designer furniture tagged with brands. Each image was dated, geo-tagged, tied to charges Joan never authorized. When he showed Joan the compiled binder, she leafed through it slowly, page after page. Monica smiling in a fur coat, Monica lounging in a spa tub, Monica holding up a shopping bag with the words "worth every penny." She left a trail, Victor said, his tone dry. One even bleach can't erase. Joan shut the binder and set it neatly on the desk. Good. Trails always lead somewhere. But Victor wasn't finished. He tapped a new folder, his brow furrowed. And I found something else. Not just credit cards, not just shopping. Monica's name appears on lien attempts filed against your property, Joan. She tried to leverage your house as collateral for her debt. The words landed heavier than any bill collector's call. For a moment Joan sat very still, her fingers resting on the edge of the folder. The fluorescent lights hummed above them, sharp against the silence. Shirley leaned forward, her voice dropping into a growl. She tried to steal your home? Victor nodded grimly. If we hadn't uncovered it, she might have pulled it off. We'll get it voided. But this shows intent. Aggressive intent. Joan exhaled slowly, her eyes steady, her voice measured. Then she isn't just laundering money. She's trying to launder me out of existence. The room seemed to shrink around them, the smell of toner sharp in the air, the weight of betrayal settling like damp fabric. Outside the window, snow flurries drifted past the Milwaukee skyline, but inside the cycle was just heating up. The folder lay open on Victor's desk, and the black and white print of the fraudulent lien glared like graffiti across Joan's life. Her name was bold at the top, but the details twisted beneath it, amounts she'd never agreed to, signatures she never signed, all tethered to her modest Milwaukee home. The very house where she folded towels each night had been turned into collateral for Monica's greed. Joan read the document once, then again. The lines blurred, not from age or exhaustion, but from a cold fury settling behind her eyes. She wanted my bed, my credit, and now my roof. Victor leaned forward, his knuckles against the desk. It's voidable, but this isn't sloppy. Monica had help. These filings weren't put together on a whim. Shirley stood by the window, arms crossed, watching traffic crawl along the icy street. She's clawing at anything she can grab. Doesn't matter if it's dirty. Joan closed the folder and slid it back to Victor. Her hand was steady, her voice low but cutting. Then cut it loose. Scrub her name off my deed. The next hearing came quickly. The courthouse was heavy with fluorescent light and the faint smell of disinfectant. Joan sat at the plaintiff's table beside Victor, her wool coat folded neatly across her lap. Across the aisle, Monica fidgeted, her heels tapping a nervous rhythm against the tile floor. Caleb sat stiff beside her, jaw locked, face pale. The judge, a silver-haired man with a sharp gaze, flipped through the file with irritation that only grew. Finally, he snapped the folder shut and leveled his stare at Monica. Attempting to attach fraudulent liens to an elder's property is not only unethical, it's criminal. Do you realize the seriousness of this action? Monica's voice faltered. Her charm cracked. I didn't file those directly. It must have been. Save it, the judge cut her off, his gavel hitting wood with a crack that echoed across the courtroom. This lien is void. Penalties will be added to the damages under review. Mrs. Whitaker, you are restored sole and uncontested ownership of your home. Victor inclined his head respectfully. Thank you, Your Honor. Joan remained silent, but her eyes flicked to Monica, whose face drained of color. She folded her hands in her lap, composed, taking quiet note of every word. Outside the courthouse steps, Shirley clapped her gloved hands together, the cold air puffing white from her laughter. Dryers heating up Joan. That judge didn't just void it, he torched her reputation while he was at it. Joan pulled her scarf tighter against the wind, her tone even. Good, some stains need heat to lift. Victor joined them, his leather briefcase swinging at his side. The trial is officially locked in. No delays, no extensions. Fraud, identity theft, attempted lien manipulation, all under one docket. Date is set for 3 weeks. Shirley's eyes gleamed. 3 weeks until spin cycle goes full throttle. For the first time in days, Joan let a small smile touch her lips. The wind whipped against her coat, but inside she felt the steady hum of control returning. Back in the neighborhood, the whispers that had begun as murmurs now spread like wildfire. At the corner diner, at the grocery store, at the gas station, the story traveled faster than gossip could usually sprint. Monica's name had turned sour. Her brunch friends no longer returned calls, and one even posted a thinly veiled message online. Some people pretend to be wealthy until the receipts come out. Joan found the headline the following morning. A neighbor had left the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel on the front porch, folded neatly with the article circled in pen. Daughter-in-law faces fraud charges against elder mother-in-law. She carried it into the laundry room, set it gently on top of the dryer, and smoothed the creases. The print smudged faintly against her fingers, black ink staining the skin. Joan wiped it away on her apron, her eyes steady. The cycle was building. Soon everything would tumble out. The courthouse buzzed like a hive. The morning of the trial, neighbors filled the benches, some clutching coffee cups, others craning their necks as though this were a theater performance instead of a fraud case. The air smelled faintly of polish and tension, the kind of stillness that comes before thunder. Joan sat at the plaintiff's table, her gray suit pressed sharp, her files aligned in front of her like folded linens. She didn't fidget, didn't shift in her chair. Her gaze stayed forward, calm as stone, while the chatter around her swelled and died down. Across the aisle, Monica fussed with her hair, her lipstick already smudged at the corner. Caleb sat rigid beside her, his shoulders hunched, his face pale. The swagger he'd once carried around the neighborhood had drained, leaving a man avoiding every eye turned his way. Victor rose first, his presence filling the room without needing to raise his voice. He opened a binder thick with evidence, flipping to the first tab. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not about a misunderstanding. It is about calculated theft, identity and fraud, financial abuse against an elder. He laid out the fraudulent accounts one by one. Bank statements projected on a screen showed Joan's name tied to luxury purchases in Chicago, salon memberships, even a leased SUV. Each receipt bore Monica's signature, looping and stylish, as damning as a fingerprint. Whispers rolled through the benches. Joan caught the faint scent of someone's perfume mixing with floor wax, but her focus never wavered. She watched Victor steady and silent, like a laundress observing a cycle she knew would end exactly as planned. When Monica's turn came under cross-exam, Victor's tone sharpened. He held up an Instagram post. Monica posing in fur with the caption "New money, new life." "Who paid for this coat?" he asked, his voice crisp. "My husband," Monica shot back. "He provides for me." Victor slid the receipt onto the evidence table. "Purchased on a credit line in Joan Whitaker's name. Care to explain the signature?" The jury leaned in. Monica's face blanched, then flushed, her mouth opening and closing before words finally tumbled out. "I was authorized. She said I could." Joan finally turned her head, her calm gaze meeting Monica's panicked eyes. "I never authorized you," she said, her voice firm enough to cut through the courtroom air. The silence that followed was louder than any shout. Caleb shifted uncomfortably, his hands clasped so tight his knuckles went white. When called to testify, his answers came halting, defensive. "I thought she knew about the accounts." Monica said she did. "I didn't ask questions." His eyes darted toward Joan, then fell to the floor, shame carving deep lines across his face. The jury's expressions hardened. One woman shook her head slowly, lips pressed thin. Another leaned back, arms crossed, as though the evidence reeked. Victor's closing words struck like a gavel before the actual one came. This wasn't just greed. This was theft dressed in family clothing, and it deserves to be treated as such. The judge disappeared into chambers, leaving the room buzzing. Minutes dragged like hours, the hum of whispers and the shuffle of papers stretching thin. Joan remained motionless, her breath even, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When the judge returned, the gallery stilled. His voice carried the weight of finality. "On charges of fraud, identity theft, and attempted lien manipulation, this court finds the defendants guilty. Restitution will be ordered. Penalties will apply. Assets tied to fraudulent activity will be seized immediately." Gasps rippled through the benches. Monica let out a strangled noise, part protest, part despair. Caleb dropped his face into his hands. Joan only straightened her shoulders, eyes fixed forward, as though she had known this ending all along. The spin cycle had finished, and now the ringing out would begin. The verdict had barely settled before the first knock came. Early morning, crisp sunlight spilling across the Whitakers' street, a tow truck idling at the curb. The rumble echoed through the neighborhood, rattling windows, drawing curtains back just far enough for curious eyes. The luxury SUV Monica had flaunted for months gleamed in the driveway. Its black paint reflected the tow truck's yellow lights, a mirror catching the moment justice rolled in. The repo man clipped chains to the tires, the metallic clink loud enough to ring through the block. Monica burst through the front door in a silk robe, her hair unbrushed, panic already etched across her face. "You can't take that. That's my car." Her voice cracked into the chill air, sharp and desperate. The repo man didn't flinch. "Ma'am, this vehicle was leased under fraudulent credit. It's property of the bank now." Neighbors gathered at a distance, arms folded, murmurs carrying like wind through dry grass. Monica's protests rose higher, words tangling with screams until her throat turned raw. She clutched the car door handle, knuckles white, as the engine roared and the SUV rolled away. Caleb appeared behind her, his shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. He didn't intervene. He only stood there, a man unraveling in his own driveway, watching the glossy symbol of their new money vanish into the horizon. From her laundry nook, Joan heard every sound: the chains, the engine, the faint echo of Monica's shrill voice. She smoothed a fitted sheet on her cot, folded it carefully, then set it in a stack. Her voice was calm, steady when Shirley stopped by later. "That's the cycle completed," Joan said. Shirley grinned, eyes bright, "and they're hanging out to dry." By the end of the week, the seizures spread like a storm. Credit accounts Joan never opened were drained, the balances redirected as restitution. Monica's jewelry collection disappeared into padded envelopes, tagged for auction. A storage unit, once hidden under Caleb's name, was emptied by court order, its contents, expensive furniture and unopened electronics, carted away on flatbeds. Each loss was public. Each loss stung, and the neighborhood, once dazzled by Monica's brunch spreads and designer dresses, now whispered openly about what had fueled them. Victor met Joan at his office that Friday, sliding a final ledger across the desk. Restitution secured. The courts will distribute funds in staggered payments, but your accounts are protected. Monica can't touch them again. Joan glanced at the papers, nodding once. She thought she could press me flat. She forgot I don't wrinkle easy. Victor allowed himself a small smile. And she forgot you kept records. That evening Joan sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching twilight spill across the street. Monica's voice rose again, but not with laughter this time. She screamed into her phone on the porch, pacing in frantic circles, her words sharp and brittle. I can't live like this. Caleb. They're stripping us bare. Caleb muttered something too low to catch. His shoulders sagged, his head hung low. He didn't shout, he didn't fight. He looked like a man who had lost the air to keep standing tall. The scent of chamomile curled from Joan's cup. She sipped slowly, her gaze steady, as though the unraveling before her was nothing more than another cycle on its way to completion. But the worst hit came days later. The sheriff's cruiser rolled up quietly at dusk, lights flashing red across the siding of the house. He stepped out, a heavy envelope in hand, boots crunching against the frosted lawn. Caleb opened the door this time, his face drained of color before the sheriff even spoke. Foreclosure notice, the sheriff announced, his voice carrying across the yard. He hammered the posting onto the wooden frame beside the door, the sound of nails striking wood sharp enough to echo down the block. Neighbors lingered at their fences, silent witnesses to the unraveling of the Whitakers' kingdom. Monica collapsed onto the porch steps, her scream tearing through the twilight. Caleb lowered himself beside her, his head buried in his hands, and from her window, Joan watched the sign flap in the winter wind, another page in a record she had written without lifting her voice. By noon, half the neighborhood had gathered. Phones were raised, camera lenses zoomed in, and whispers rippled like static through the cold air. What once was Monica's showcase lawn, trimmed hedges, manicured flower beds, had turned into a stage for humiliation. Monica stormed onto the porch, her hair wild, her voice breaking with fury. You can't record this. Stop filming me. She lunged toward one neighbor, holding up her phone, but the woman only stepped back, clutching her coat tighter and pressing record harder. Another neighbor muttered, not quietly enough. She bragged about that office. Look at her now. Monica's scream carried across the block, sharp as glass. Her heels slipped on the frozen steps, and she nearly fell before grabbing the railing. The neighbors gasped, not out of concern, but with the same hunger people feel watching a train wreck. Inside, Caleb was a shadow of himself. Cardboard boxes lined the hallway, half packed with belongings that once screamed luxury: fur throws, gold-trimmed mirrors, crystal vases. His hands moved stiffly, folding shirts into a suitcase as if the act itself were a punishment. Sweat dotted his brow despite the cold, his breathing uneven. From the laundry nook, Joan listened to the chaos spilling through the vents. She heard Monica's sobs, Caleb's muttered curses, the scrape of tape being torn across cardboard. She folded her sheets, smoothed the corners, and stacked them with precision. Her face betrayed nothing. Later that afternoon, Shirley pulled up in her old sedan, rolling down the window to take in the scene. Well, she said, eyes flicking to the foreclosure sign, laundry looks empty now. Joan climbed into the passenger seat, her coat neatly buttoned, her bag tucked on her lap. She glanced once at the house, not with longing or anger, but with the cool detachment of someone checking off a completed task. They drove past slowly, the hum of the engine blending with the muffled shouts behind them. Joan didn't turn her head again. At the corner, Shirley tapped the wheel, her grin sharp. Auctions already scheduled. Papers listed for next month. Joan sipped from the thermos she carried, her tea still steaming. Houses come and go. They thought walls could cage me. I learned walls can collapse. The days that followed stripped Monica further. Movers arrived, their breath visible in the cold air as they hauled out furniture. Neighbors filmed discreetly from driveways, some bold enough to linger and whisper openly. Monica shouted at them, called them parasites, but her voice cracked too much to land any bite. Caleb avoided confrontation. He kept his head down, carried boxes to the curb and packed the car in silence. His movements were mechanical, his shame a weight that bent his back lower with every trip. Joan passed by once more, this time driving herself. She slowed at the sight of movers loading the last of the dining set, the same table where she had once been mocked over chicken and scalloped potatoes. Monica stood on the porch, mascara streaking down her cheeks, shrieking into her phone about unfair treatment. Joan's hands remained steady on the wheel. She didn't wave, didn't smile. She only pressed her foot lightly on the gas and continued down the street, leaving the echo of Monica's meltdown behind. But just as the neighbors thought the spectacle had ended, another blow came. At midnight, Monica filed for bankruptcy. The news broke the next morning, first whispered by a clerk at the courthouse, then confirmed by local reporters. By afternoon, the headlines spread across the neighborhood group chat. Monica Whitaker declares bankruptcy after fraud trial, and as the house stood stripped bare waiting for auction, Joan folded a final stack of fresh linens in her laundry room, her calm unbroken. The bankruptcy hearing lasted less than an hour, but its weight crushed harder than any verdict. Monica sat slumped beside her attorney, her once perfect hair limp, her voice barely above a whisper as she confirmed her insolvency. Caleb kept his eyes fixed on the table, as if refusing to look at the papers that documented the death of their life together. The judge's words were final, echoing through the courtroom like stones dropped in water. All non-exempt assets will be liquidated. Outstanding debts are to be discharged under bankruptcy code. Case closed. With a single gavel strike, the Whitakers' empire of stolen credit and shallow pride collapsed. Outside, Monica tried to hold herself tall, but her face betrayed her. Neighbors who lingered at the courthouse doors turned away quickly, pretending to be checking their phones, though Joan caught the flickers of recognition in their eyes. The same women who once cheered Monica's brunches now whispered behind manicured nails, their words quick and biting. Bankrupt. Serves her right. Imagine stealing from your mother-in-law. Monica tugged her coat collar high, but nothing could shield her from the sting. She was no longer the hostess, no longer the center of attention. She was a spectacle, her reputation as hollow as her drained bank account. Caleb trailed beside her, his jaw clenched, his face a mask of defeat. For the first time Joan saw the boy she had raised stripped of bravado, the boy who once leaned on her during thunderstorms, who once begged her for help after flunking college classes. Now he was a man emptied out, estranged even from himself. Back at her laundry nook, Joan sat quietly, a file folder open before her. Victor had secured the restitution into a trust, untouchable by Monica, safe from Caleb's hands. Her name sat printed in bold letters on the document, clean and secure, the lines of ink sharp as fresh stitches. Shirley came by with a box of pastries, setting them on the dryer with a grin. The sweet smell of cinnamon rolls filled the warm room, clashing with the faint chemical tang of bleach. Time for a small celebration, she declared, pouring coffee into mismatched mugs. Joan lifted her cup, the steam curling against her face. It's done then. Victor called that evening, his voice steady over the line. No recovery possible, Joan. Bankruptcy's complete. They're finished. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the words settle. Not in triumph, not in gloating, but in quiet finality. A cycle had run its course. The next morning the news broke. A local journalist had written a feature, bold black headlines stretching across the Milwaukee Sentinel. Elder Oak Mort's family leaves daughter-in-law bankrupt. Joan clipped the article carefully, smoothing the edges before tucking it into her binder of records. The paper still smelled of ink, the fresh press sharp on her fingertips. She tucked it neatly between folders of deeds and pensions, another record in the long history she had kept with precision. The spin cycle wasn't just completed. It had wrung Monica and Caleb dry, leaving nothing but the residue of their choices. and yet Joan knew one final rinse remained. The article about Monica's bankruptcy still sat clipped in Joan's binder when she made her next move. She carried herself into the credit union one bright Saturday morning, coat buttoned, shoes polished, binder tucked under her arm. The air inside was warm, humming with quiet chatter, and the faint scent of ink and fresh bills. The teller recognized her from the paper. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said softly, leaning forward as if in respect. "How can we help you today?" Joan placed the binder down with deliberate care. "I'd like to set aside a portion of my restitution into a fund for housing." The man blinked, surprised. "You want to donate?" She nodded once. "People need roofs. Mine was nearly stolen. Let's make sure others keep theirs." By the following week, a press release circulated. "Local widow establishes housing fund after family fraud case." The story spread fast, sharper than gossip, stronger than humiliation. Neighbors who once pitied her now approached her at the market with admiration. Strangers sent letters of thanks. At a small community gathering, the mayor even shook her hand, his cologne strong in the chilly air. "You've turned something rotten into something good," he said. Cameras flashed, voices cheered. Joan smiled faintly, but kept her composure. Praise wasn't what she sought. Precision was. Meanwhile, Monica's fall deepened. Word traveled that she'd taken a job at a strip mall clothing store on the south side. Joan heard it first from Shirley, who recounted the scene with biting clarity. "I walked in for socks, and there she was, folding clearance sweaters. Couldn't even meet my eyes." Monica's once manicured nails were now chipped, her hands dry from cheap detergent. Customers barely noticed her. Those who did recognized her from headlines and whispered behind racks of polyester. She endured the humiliation with tight jaws and hollow eyes, each paycheck swallowed by debts that never truly vanished. Caleb drifted further into shadow. He no longer stood at Monica's side, no longer appeared at gatherings, no longer dared approach Joan. When she saw him once at the gas station, he ducked his head, mumbling something that could have been hello, or maybe an apology he hadn't the courage to finish. Joan watched him pump gas into a battered sedan, shoulders hunched, shame clinging to him like damp clothes. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. She simply returned to her car, turned the key, and drove away. Later that week, Shirley sat with her in the laundry room, the warm air filled with the faint scent of lavender sheets. She tapped the binder Joan always kept nearby. "They stripped you of dignity, you bleached theirs out." Joan folded a towel, sharp creases pressed between her fingers. "Laundry never lies." They both fell silent, listening to the hum of the dryer, steady as a heartbeat. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the riverfront park in gold, Joan opened a fresh notebook at her kitchen table. The first page gleamed under the lamp. Waiting. She lifted her pen, its weight familiar, steady in her hand. At the top, in bold strokes, she wrote, "The Spin Cycle." The title stared back at her. Simple and sharp. Her memoir would not be about victimhood. It would be about precision, patience, and how a woman shoved into the laundry folded an entire empire of lies into nothing. She turned the page, ready to begin. The ballroom lights glittered against polished chandeliers, throwing reflections across the tables draped in linen. Dozens of voices mingled with the clink of glasses, but when Joan entered, silence spread in ripples. People turned. Applause rose. It was the annual banquet of the Wisconsin Elder Advocacy Group, and Joan Whitaker was the night's honoree. She, the woman shoved into a laundry room, was now being celebrated for resilience. Her name had become a symbol, proof that records, patience, and backbone could outlast arrogance. Joan walked slowly to the stage, her dark suit pressed crisp, her hair pinned with deliberate care. She carried no notes. She didn't need them. Victor Lane introduced her, his voice carrying warmth but edged with admiration. "This is a woman who never raised her voice, never flinched, and never bent when injustice tried to break her. She didn't fight with fists, she fought with precision, and she won." The applause that followed was thunderous. Joan stood at the podium, hands resting lightly on the wood, eyes sweeping the crowd. The air smelled faintly of roses from the centerpieces, the room warm with expectation. I was told once that laundry suited me, she began, her voice clear. They thought shoving me in a laundry room was a way to shrink me. But laundry teaches patience. Cycles take time. Stains don't vanish in one rinse. And sometimes the quietest spin produces the sharpest result. The crowd rose to its feet, cheers blending with the rustle of standing applause. Joan didn't linger at the podium. She gave a small nod and stepped back, her calmness more powerful than any flourish. At her table Shirley beamed, her hands clapping until they reddened. I told you, Joan, you're detergent. They underestimated you, and you stripped them down to threads. Joan smiled faintly, sipping from her water glass. Detergent doesn't brag, it just works. Later, while mingling near the dessert tables, Joan felt a tug at her sleeve. She turned to find her grandchildren, Caleb's two teenagers, standing hesitantly. Their voices were soft, awkward, but earnest. Grandma, we wanted to say thank you, the older one said. His voice cracked with the strain of adolescence. For not letting them walk over you. The younger nodded, eyes glossy. You showed us how to stand up, even against family. Joan reached out, her hand resting lightly on their shoulders. Her heart, though steeled for so long, softened in that moment. Strength isn't about shouting, she told them gently. It's about knowing where you won't bend. Remember that. They hugged her, quick and shy, before retreating into the crowd. Joan watched them go, her expression steady but her throat tightening with quiet emotion. 2 weeks later, she sat at Victor's office, the scent of coffee lingering as papers slid across his desk. Her will was updated, signed, notarized. Caleb and Monica were cut out entirely. The restitution funds and her home would pass instead to her grandchildren, and to the housing trust she had created. Victor capped his pen and leaned back, studying her. You've secured everything. They can't touch it now. Joan closed the folder, her fingers smoothing the edge. They already touched enough. This makes sure they never will again. When she stepped out of his office, the cold Milwaukee wind bit at her cheeks, but she pulled her scarf tighter, unbothered. She had lived through worse storms. The neighborhood, once a stage for her humiliation, now bent toward her with respect. At the grocery store, people smiled, not with pity, but with admiration. A neighbor left a tin of cookies on her porch, with a note that read, "To strength that doesn't fold." Shirley teased her mercilessly. "Look at you, neighborhood hero. Next thing they'll be asking you to run for office." Joan shook her head, folding linens at her dryer. "I don't need office. I just need peace." And she was building it, piece by piece. With a portion of the restitution, Joan transformed her space. A contractor arrived with wood beams and fresh paint. The scent of sawdust filled the house for days, the sound of hammers echoing like distant drums. Shirley stopped by often, marveling at the progress. "After everything, you finally get a room again," she said, watching as workers carried in a four-poster bed and soft carpeting. Joan stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching the space take shape. Not just a room, a refuge. When the last coat of paint dried, the new bedroom glowed with soft light. Fresh linens folded at the foot of the bed, curtains swaying lightly in the winter breeze. It wasn't extravagant. It wasn't flashy. It was hers. She stood in the center of it, inhaling deeply, the faint scent of fresh paint mixing with lavender sheets. For the first time in years, she felt walls that sheltered rather than caged. And as she smoothed her quilt across the bed, Joan knew the laundry cycle was ending. But one final load remained. The riverfront park stretched quiet under a late Wisconsin sunset. Bare trees etched dark lines against the gold and pink sky, and the water carried the light like molten glass. Joan sat on a bench with Shirley beside her, both women wrapped in coats, steam curling from the paper cups of coffee they held. The air smelled faintly of damp leaves and wood smoke from distant chimneys. Children's laughter drifted faintly from a playground, but the two women sat in a pocket of stillness, their silence companionable, earned. Joan's phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She answered without hurry. Mrs. Whitaker, Victor's voice said, calm and sure. Case closed. All filings resolved. They're finished. Joan exhaled slowly, watching a ripple spread across the water as a duck cut through the glassy surface. Thank you, Victor. Your accounts are secured, untouchable. You're free now. She nodded, though he couldn't see it. Freedom feels quieter than I imagined. Shirley smirked beside her, nudging her elbow. Quiet suits you. When Joan hung up, they sat again in silence, sipping coffee as the light faded. She thought of the cot in the laundry room, the smell of bleach clinging to her hair, the way humiliation had once pressed against her chest like a weight. She thought of Monica's scream on the lawn, Caleb's silence in court, the foreclosure sign nailed to their door. Every cycle had ended where it belonged. Later that night, Joan walked through her new bedroom. The paint smelled faintly sweet, the linens folded crisp at the foot of the bed, lavender clinging to the air. She smoothed her quilt, fingertips brushing the stitches she'd once believed would never again cover her own bed. In the corner, her binder of files rested, closed at last, beside the fresh notebook titled The Spin Cycle. The house was quiet, only the tick of the clock and the hum of the furnace filling the air. For once she didn't hear the dryer. Shirley visited the next morning, dropping a bag of groceries on the counter before peeking into the room. She whistled low, grinning at the sight of the tidy space. Best load you ever ran. Joan smiled, setting mugs on the table, and the only one I don't need to run again. They sat together, coffee steaming, the weight of the past year behind them. The air in the room felt lighter now, as though walls could finally shelter rather than suffocate. Joan picked up her pen, opening the notebook to the blank page after her title. She looked out the window at the slow-moving river in the distance, its surface reflecting clean and endless. Her hand moved steady across the page as she wrote her first line. They took my bedroom and gave me a cot in the laundry room, so I laundered their future until it was worthless.